Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
This flu season is shaping up to be one of the most concerning that Canada has seen in years. Flu cases are surging across the country, hospitals are under strain, and some experts are warning that this season is significantly worse than what we're used to. Every year, the flu sends thousands of Canadians to the hospital and even claims thousands of lives, quietly ranking among the top causes of death in Canada. But when flu season hits hard, the impact ripples far beyond respiratory illness. Emergency rooms fill up, surgeries are cancelled, and care for all patients is delayed. This year, multiple viruses are circulating all at once, and there are growing concerns not just about how severe this season could become, but how well prepared we are to respond. I'm Nima Rajan, and today on The Big Story, we're breaking down what's driving this intense flu season, what comes next, and what Canadians can do to protect themselves and each other. Joining me now to unpack all this is Dr. Joss Reimer, former Chief Medical Officer for the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority and past President of the Canadian Medical Association. Dr. Reimer, thanks again for your time today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
How would you describe this flu season so far compared to what we normally expect in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, we're still early in the flu season, so we don't know with certainty how bad things are going to get, but the early indications are that the numbers are going to be one of the higher years that we've had in the last little while anyway, certainly since before the pandemic. So when we're seeing right now that the percent that are testing positive when they get tested for a respiratory illness are quite high, higher than 20%. And that's concerning. The more people who are testing positive when they get tested, that's a good measure of how much flu is really going around. And it's happening a little earlier than we usually see. That said, we've seen even earlier in some other parts of the world. So Canada maybe isn't quite as early with their flu season as parts of Europe or Japan have seen. But all in all, I'd say we're worried about the impact this year.
And why does this flu season seem to be a little worse this time around?
One of the things that we saw this summer, which is rare for something to happen like this during the summer, was that the virus mutated a little bit. So we had probably a pretty good match with the vaccine compared to the virus going into the summer. And the reason the summer is important is that we actually choose what types of influenza go into the vaccine well before the influenza season. Usually it's February of the year before that gets chosen because we have to manufacture it and send it all around the world. And so that decision happened. And then over the summer, the virus changed, which has now led us to be in a bit of a mismatch where the vaccine isn't quite as good at protecting people from infection as it usually would be. And so that's just making it spread a little more easily. And then we've also seen fewer people getting vaccinated compared to some previous years. So when you both have a vaccine that doesn't work quite as well and fewer people getting it, that's kind of a recipe for a lot more spread. And so we're worried that we're going to see a lot more, particularly as we see the effects of the holiday season when people are getting together, spending time in groups. What happens right after that can be really concerning.
And these sorts of mutations to the virus, it seems that it was unexpected, but is this sort of normal? Why does it seem to have mutated over the summer?
Yeah, the virus mutates all the time. It's always trying to find the best way to survive. That's how viruses, this bacteria, they try to adjust to find better ways to survive in the world. It doesn't usually change that much over the summer because it's not usually spreading that much over the summer. So it doesn't have as many opportunities to change. So why it did this summer is a bit of random chance. It happens. It's just not really common for it to change that much over the summer because it's just not around enough for it to have that opportunity to change. But it happened this year. And so what we worry about looking at the future is particularly, I know I've talked about this in some other settings, with the changes that we anticipate coming out of the US and their surveillance, is that this mismatch might happen more often just because we're not going to know with as much certainty what to put in the vaccine. So even if the virus doesn't change, if our data is not as good, we might see seasons like this coming a lot more often in the future.
And I know you recently wrote an article about this, U.S. data on the flu virus. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why it's so important for Canada?
Well, the U.S. has up until basically this year, been a global leader in public health interventions, in public health data, and they really wanted to be. They put a lot of effort into becoming a global powerhouse in collecting and sharing information about public health. And so the world was really appreciative of that and took advantage appropriately of the information they were sharing. So they are probably the largest contributor to influenza monitoring in the world. They monitor within the country. They also monitor all of the military bases around the world. So they have information not just from within the continental US, but they actually collect information from countries around the world so that they can tell us what's circulating and not just what type of influenza, but what subtype, which really helps us when we're making decisions about how to formulate the vaccine. Now, with their decision to pull out of the World Health Organization, presumably they're going to stop sharing data. And so that's problematic in two ways. One is just the dollars. They contribute a large proportion, maybe even up to 20% of the World Health Organization's budget comes from the US. So big cuts are going to have to come to what the World Health Organization can do. But then the data itself is going to be lacking if they don't share. And Canada, we're a relatively small country. We aren't going to be able to make up the difference in knowing what's circulating, what exact subtype is circulating, because while we analyze hundreds of samples a year, they're looking at many thousands of samples a year and sharing that information with the World Health Organization.
So, how can Canada kind of make up for this lack of data and research when it comes to the flu and the variants that come out of it?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to do a lot of partnering with other countries because Canada alone is not going to be able to make up for it, but we certainly need to try. So I want to see Canada doing more testing of the influenza samples and not just the testing, but actually doing the genetic sequencing. And that takes a lot of technical expertise, takes a lot of laboratory time, money. And so it requires an investment from the country. And we've always sort of had that advantage that we could lean on our neighbors who probably have very similar viruses spreading. They don't respect borders. And so because we share the largest land border in the world, we're going to see a lot of the virus moving back and forth as people move back and forth. But anything we can do is still helpful. I don't think Canada alone can make up for it. I also want to see the European labs stepping up and doing more analysis, and Japan, everyone in the Northern Hemisphere. The flu virus spreads differently in the north and in the south just because of the seasonal variation. So we both experience it during our winters, but our winters are opposite times of the year. So how the US changes are going to impact the world really affects the Northern Hemisphere more. So if Canada, Japan, and Europe can increase what analysis they're doing, we might be able to still have a relatively robust analysis of the virus. But that's assuming everybody steps up and does that. And so I'm genuinely concerned that we're going to start seeing flu seasons that are worse, where our tool to fight it is a little weaker every year. And we're going to see just that many more people getting sick, that many more in the hospital, that many more dying. And it's really devastating when we had a system that was working quite well.
You know, it's really surprising because when you think about the flu, you often don't think about the severity of the flu, the impact that it has in the country. I was quite surprised to learn that the flu is one of the top causes of death in Canada. Why do you think that's not that well known?
Most of the people who get severely ill and those who die tend to be people who either have other health conditions or are elderly. And so when most of us don't see that in our day-to-day life, it can be very easy to put that aside. The other issue is that people don't necessarily know when they have the flu versus a cold. And so they might have something like rhinovirus, which is basically the common cold, and they don't know the difference between those two. And so they might be like, well, it's not a big deal. I just got sick for like a couple of days, had a runny nose, bit of a sore throat, but that's not actually influenza. When you get influenza, most people feel very ill. They get a fever, they have body aches, they can't move very easily. It tends to be more severe than the cold, but people don't know which one they have. They also tend to think of flu as stomach flu. And so get a lot of confusion there where they think, well, it's a gastrointestinal illness and I'm not throwing up. So I don't think that people have a great understanding of what influenza is and how it impacts us. But I like that you brought up that it is one of the biggest causes of death in the country because we see, just in my city, we see thousands of people coming into the emergency rooms every week with influenza-like illness. Not all of it is influenza, but it's a major part of what our emergency rooms are dealing with. Thousands of people every week being assessed for that. And so maybe in our day-to-day lives, we don't see it, but I can tell you that when you have a loved one who ends up in the ICU, that becomes very real, very fast. And even if you survive that, and stay in the ICU is a really traumatic thing to go through. And I don't wish that on anyone. And so I really hope that we can get the message out that getting the flu vaccine is the best tool that we have to be able to prevent severe illness amongst ourselves and our loved ones, particularly our loved ones who are already ill or who are elderly. It's a really good tool, even if this year it's not as good as usual.
And there are some broader reaching impacts of ICUs and emergency rooms being full of flu patients. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and this has gotten a lot worse since the pandemic. We are seeing across the board in Canada shortages in spaces for patients in hospitals. All of the beds are full, and so you have people waiting in the emergency room who can't go and get a bed on the ward because there's just none available. And the more people who are coming in with influenza requiring a hospital stay, an ICU stay, that's one more person who's going to have to wait in the emergency room with their broken hip or something else that requires care, but we just don't have the staffing, the bed availability, and so it does impact anyone who needs healthcare. When there aren't spaces available to care for people, that impacts everyone, whether they are at risk of severe illness from influenza or not. And we've all experienced that. We've all had to go either ourselves or with a loved one to an ER and wait many hours. And that is frustrating at best and can have life and death consequences at worst. And we've seen cases where people didn't get the care they needed in the emergency room and died because they couldn't get that care. So, and these are people who didn't have influenza, but just couldn't get the care that they needed. And that gets worse during influenza season.
All right, Dr. Anna, what seems to be one of the immediate solutions to this issue would be for more people to get the flu vaccine. What would you say to those who might say there are multiple mutations of the flu virus? So what is the point of me getting this vaccine that doesn't cover multiple mutations?
Yeah, and I get it's a confusing thing. And when you hear us saying that there's a mismatch, I think people hear it's useless. And I think my message is it's not useless. It's not as good as some years, but it still works. It still helps boost your immunity. It makes it a little bit less likely that you're going to get infected, a little less likely that you get a severe illness if you do get infected, a little less likely that you can spread it to someone else. So when we have a mismatch, it's not that the vaccine doesn't work, it's that it's just not quite as strong. And so it makes it even more important that more people get the vaccine so that as a community, we have just that much less opportunity for the virus to spread. And the less opportunity that the virus has to spread, the less it can mutate. And so that's also really helpful when we're thinking about mutating the virus even during the season. When there's less spread, there's less mutation because the virus mutates as it spreads from person to person. So really, it's such a low risk thing to do, getting the influenza vaccine. The main risk is a sore arm, and about 1 in a million people will have a severe reaction to it. But the good that can come of it, even if you don't care that much about whether or not you get influenza, to protect your grandmother, your grandfather, your aunt who has some sort of immune deficiency, I mean, that can be huge. And then protecting our system so that everyone who needs care has better access, that's also really huge. The other thing we're seeing this year, which is a bit different from usual, is we're seeing more kids who are getting severely ill. So I've seen some numbers out of Ontario specifically where they're having more kids being admitted, more kids with severe illness than they would in a usual season. I don't know all the details yet about why that's happening, but we usually think more about the elderly. And this year, I think we also need to think about protecting kids.
That's really interesting. And in terms of other steps we can take in addition to the vaccine to prevent the spread of the virus, what are some everyday steps people can take?
Yeah, and this is where we go back to that same messaging that you heard all the time during the pandemic. And I wish we didn't have to keep spreading it, but I didn't. Unintended pun there. But the hand washing, it turns out we're all so bad at that. And really, it can be quite helpful, even for a respiratory illness, because, you touch your face, you touch something else, you go directly and touch another person. it can be really, really helpful. If you're going to be somewhere where you're shaking hands, where you're hugging people, where you're sharing utensils, where you're going to be directly touching other people, that hand washing can make a difference. The other thing is staying home when you're sick. I know, we've got gatherings, we have parties, it's when it's winter time and we want to make sure that we get time to spend with people. A lot of it's indoors, but if you're feeling really ill, staying home can protect other people. So stay home from work when you're ill, stay home from social gatherings, and just get better. We really want you to take the time to feel better. And we also want to protect everybody else in that environment because you also never know what their health status might be. And so making sure that you're doing everything you can to stop that virus from spreading is really helpful.
And I know you brought up the pandemic. And, when we think about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I'm sure would be a core memory for a lot of people still, you would think that we live in a world that's a lot more careful about the spread of disease and viruses. So why is the flu so dangerous this year? Didn't we learn anything from the pandemic on mitigating the impact of viruses?
I mean, I think we learned a lot, but I think people also got really exhausted by everything that they went through. That was a traumatic time for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. Some people lost jobs, some people lost loved ones. Like there was a huge spectrum of difficult scenarios that people went through. And so I think it's a normal human reaction to feel like, we're through that. I want to move on and push away from it. Uh, and at the same time, we are seeing people who have better knowledge about how to protect themselves, how to protect other people. Apart from it in Asia and then people who have lived in Asia coming into Canada, you almost never saw people wearing masks in general in society in Canada before the pandemic. And now I do see people when they're feeling unwell, when they're coughing, it's not, it's become more acceptable for people to wear masks when they're sick. And I think that that's a win. And I hope that we keep doing that. I think that's a really excellent thing we can learn from a lot of Asian countries, that even if you don't want to wear a mask all the time, if you wear one when you're sick, that can protect everybody else. It's really good at catching those particles, those droplets when you cough if you have a mask on. So if you can't stay home when you're sick for a variety of reasons, putting a mask on can make a difference to protecting those people around you when you're sick. So, and I have seen that, I was traveling recently, I was, in an airport and I saw somebody coughing and they had a mask on, and I just really appreciated that, maybe they didn't have a choice about not traveling as much as I'd like them to stay home. I don't know why they were traveling, but at least they tried their best to protect the other people on the airplane.
And in terms of the broader reaching effects of the pandemic, we did talk a lot about long COVID following the pandemic. Could our immune systems may have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and in ways that might make the flu seasons more likely to be more dangerous for us?
Yeah, and we're still learning so much about long COVID. It's really a complex condition that seems to look quite different in different people. But I think that that's a reasonable hypothesis that part of what we're seeing might be long COVID. The COVID virus really was different than other viruses that we've experienced and did, for some people, cause really complex ongoing health problems, whether it was their immune system or even just damage to their lungs. When your lungs are damaged, you're going to be more susceptible to any respiratory illness, whether it's viral, bacterial. So I think that's certainly a possibility that COVID itself has caused an impact on people's immune systems or on their lung function that does make influenza easier to catch, or makes it so that you get more sick when you do get it. And we'll really have to do a lot more analysis to understand exactly what's going on with that. But in either case, the vaccine's still a really good tool to protect yourself and protect other people. And even if it doesn't work 100% of the time, it's still going to reduce the severity of illness for most people. Even if it doesn't protect you from getting infected, it is still an immune boost that helps your body respond to that virus.
All right, Dr. Reimer, what are some short-term steps that our officials or leaders can take right now to mitigate the impacts of this year's flu season?
Well, I think we need to be putting a lot of investment into the epidemiology, so like the numbers, and making sure that we understand exactly what's happening, where it's happening. And that helps us not just this season, but preparing for future seasons. So I want to see the government making sure that our National Microbiology Lab is well funded to be able to do a lot of these analyses, but also that we have the experts who can really review the numbers and help us interpret them, because the data can be very complex, and I don't expect the general public to be able to sift through and understand that. So communication of what we know becomes very, very important. And that's, sometimes an undervalued investment, but where I do think it's really, really important, because what we do know for sure is that misinformation is rampant. And particularly on social media, when people are getting bombarded with information that is not true for a variety of reasons, it can be really hard for them to sift through all of that and figure out what the best decision is for their own health and for their family. So the other thing I really want to see from all levels of government, from non-governmental organizations, is a focus on making sure that there are sources of information that can be trusted, like websites that people can go to that are easy to navigate, easy to understand, but also that we're present on social media where people are, where they're being bombarded with misinformation, so that they're also getting some accurate information. And hopefully when they watch some of those videos, their algorithms could be adjusted so that they start to get more of that accurate information. It's an uphill battle for sure, but that doesn't mean it's one we shouldn't be fighting.
All right, Dr. Reimer, really appreciate your time today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
And that was The Big Story. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. Send us an email at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. Reach us on Instagram @frequencypods or on Blue Sky @thebigstory. If you know someone that might enjoy this episode, be sure to send it to them. You can listen to The Big Story every day on the Seeker app or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nima Rajan. Thanks for listening.